All right, let's dive into one of the most moving pieces from your Class 10 First Flight textbook, from the diary of Anne Frank. We're going to get a glimpse into the world of an incredible young girl living through some of history's toughest times, all told in her very own words.
So first things first, who exactly was Anne Frank? Well, she was born Anneliese Marie Frank in Germany. As a Jewish girl, her entire life was turned upside down by the rise of the Nazis. And it's through her diary that she gave the world this unbelievably personal and up-close look at what it was like to live in hiding.
Now, to really get her story, you have to understand the world she was living in. Her family actually fled from Germany to Amsterdam looking for safety. But then, the Nazi occupation spread to the Netherlands and they were trapped. This forced them to go into hiding in a secret part of her father's office building.
And can you believe this world-famous book started out as just a simple birthday gift? Yep, for her 13th birthday, Anne got a diary. For the next 2 years, she poured her thoughts, her fears, and her dreams into it. After the war, her father, who was the only one in the family to survive, had it published. And just like that, her private words became a powerful message for the whole world.
So, in its simplest sense, a diary is just a book for your private thoughts and feelings. But for Anne, as you're about to see, it became so much more than that.
This one single quote really gets to the very heart of why Anne started writing in the first place. Paper has more patience than people. What she meant was that paper could listen forever, without ever judging her. It was the patient, silent friend she felt she was missing in her life.
And this really highlights what was going on inside her head. See, on the surface, she had it all: loving parents, a sister, and about 30 people she could call friends. But those were friends for, having fun and talking about everyday stuff. What she was really craving was that one true friend, someone she could tell anything and everything to.
So what did she do? Her solution was actually pretty brilliant. She decided her diary would become that friend. She didn't want to just write down a list of facts about her day. She wanted to build a real emotional connection. And to make it feel real, she gave her diary a name, Kitty. Every entry after that was basically a letter to her best friend. Let's quickly meet her family. There was her father, Otto, who she absolutely adored, her mother, Edith, and her older sister, Margot. Anne makes it really clear that she came from a loving home, which honestly makes her feeling of loneliness and her search for a true friend even more powerful.
This timeline shows how her family escaped from Germany bit by bit. Her dad went first in 1933 to get everything ready. Then her mom and sister followed, and finally, little Anne arrived in February 1934. She actually joked in her diary that she was plunked down on the table as a birthday present for Margot.
Even in her early life, you could see she made these really deep connections. She went to a Montessori school, and when it was time to leave, she had such a strong bond with the head mistress, Mrs. Cooperus, that they were both in tears saying goodbye. It just shows you how deeply she felt things. And another really important person in her life was her grandmother. When she passed away in 1942, it hit Anne really hard. She wrote, "No one knows how often I think of her and still love her." And to honor her, a special candle was lit for her grandmother on Anne's birthday that year. All right, so with all that background, let's jump into the main story from this lesson, which takes place at her school. The entire class is quaking in its boots, worried about who's going to be promoted to the next grade. Anne, though, pretty confident. She wasn't worried about herself or her friends, well, except maybe in maths. But overall, she got along great with her teachers. And speaking of maths, that brings us to Mr. Keesing. Anne calls him an old fogey, a bit old-fashioned. And there was one thing about Anne that always got on his nerves. She talked. A lot. This habit of being a chatterbox is really the center of this whole story. Mr. Keesing had warned her over and over, but Anne just couldn't help it. And pretty soon, her nonstop talking led to a very creative punishment. So after all those warnings, Mr. Keesing gave her extra homework. Write an essay on the topic, a chatterbox. Now, this was supposed to make her think about her talking habit. But for a girl like Anne, whose head was always buzzing with ideas, this wasn't so much a punishment as it was a challenge. And her response was just genius. Instead of saying sorry, she came up with this clever, logical argument. First, she said that talking is just a natural trait for a student. Then she claimed she inherited it from her mother. And, as she cheekily added, you can't really do much about inherited traits, can you? Mr. Keesing actually had a good laugh at her essay, but Anne, well, she kept on talking. So he hit her with a second essay, this time titled, An Incorrigible Chatterbox.
Incorrigible basically means something you can't fix. So he was playing along, but he wasn't letting her off the hook.
After that, she was quiet for 2 whole lessons. But then it happened again. Anne started talking. Mr. Keesing had had enough. The final punishment was an essay with a title that was just meant to be ridiculous. "Quack, quack, quack," said Mistress Chatterbox. The entire class burst out laughing.
At this point, Anne was pretty much out of ideas for essays. But then she realized something. Mr. Keesing was trying to make a joke out of her. So she decided to turn the joke right back on him. With a little help from her friend San, she wrote the entire essay as a poem. It was about a father swan who bites his little ducklings to death because they quacked too much. Dark humor, right?
And guess what? It totally worked. Mr. Keesing got the joke. He wasn't even mad. In fact, he loved it so much he read the poem out loud to her class and even to other classes. From that day on, he never gave her extra homework for talking again. And even better, he started making jokes in class himself. Anne had won him over.
So, what does this whole story tell us about Anne as a person? Well, for one, she was incredibly intelligent. She used logic to make her case instead of just backing down. She was also really honest about her feelings and her flaws. And most of all, she was super expressive. She had this real need to get all kinds of things off her chest.
And we absolutely have to talk about her amazing sense of humor. I mean, even when she's describing her punishments, she's so lighthearted about it. She used her wit not just to be funny, but as a tool to handle a tough situation and connect with her teacher. She could totally laugh at herself and the whole thing.
But underneath all that wit and humor, you see this real emotional depth. Remember, this is the same girl who felt so lonely, who could think so deeply about her own life at just 13, and who loved her grandmother so fiercely. It's this mix of humor and sensitivity that makes her so fascinating.
Okay, so let's pull back and look at the big themes here. The story obviously explores that universal feeling of loneliness and the need for a true friend. It also touches on the tough parts of growing up, dealing with teachers, school, and just figuring out who you are.
Another huge theme here is the freedom of expression. For Anne, writing was how she let everything out. And those punishment essays, they became her stage to show how powerful words can be, to argue, to persuade, and to entertain. In her own small way, she was fighting for her right to be heard.
This all really shows us just how important diary writing can be. It's a way to get your private thoughts out, to reflect, and to understand yourself better. And, as Anne's diary proved to the world, sometimes a private journal can become one of the most important historical records we have.
So, what's the big message you should take away from all this? First, creativity and humor are seriously powerful tools. Second, it's so important to look past someone's habits, like being a chatterbox, and see the real person underneath. And finally, everyone needs a healthy way to express their thoughts and feelings. Let's geek out on some literary terms for a second. The whole situation is just funny, right? A student completely outsmarting her teacher. And the irony is just perfect. Mr. Keesing's punishments, which were meant to shut her up, ended up making him the punchline of a very clever joke.
The language itself is a huge part of what makes this so great. It's written in that classic diary style, talking directly to Kitty. The tone is super informal and chatty. She uses words like old fogey and contractions like I'm and don't, which makes it feel like a real 13-year-old is talking right to you. Okay, if you need a quick character sketch of Anne for an exam, here are the key things to remember. She's witty and intelligent, obviously. She's talkative, for sure, but she's also incredibly insightful about her own feelings and super creative when she's backed into a corner.
And you'll definitely want to remember these quotes. Paper has more patience than people is the whole reason she started the diary. And her justifications that talking is a student's trait and an inherited trait are just perfect examples of her cleverness. They are gold for your exam answers.
All right, exam focus time. Here's exactly what you need to nail. 1. Why did Anne start the diary? 2. The whole story with Mr. Keesing and the 3 essays. 3. What were her arguments for being so talkative? And 4. How did her poem completely change her teacher's mind?
And that brings us to the end. To really lock this all in, I'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. Can you connect the dots from Anne's deep feeling of loneliness to her clever, funny victory over Mr. Keesing? Think about how needing that outlet, Kitty, might have been the very thing that sharpened her incredible wit. Thanks for tuning in.